Hello everyone. Thank you for joining me in this talk tonight. My name is Lim Beng Choo. I'm an associate professor at the Department of Japanese Studies, National University of Singapore. Today, I would first like to thank SIFA for inviting me to give this talk. This is in conjunction with the Finger Players play, Oiwa, the Ghost of Yotsuya, at this year's festival. So in this talk entitled Oiwa and Who Else? Looking Beyond J-Horror, I would like to say a few things, and this is my presentation outline. So I will start with saying what is J-Horror? And then, of course, we will have to sort of get to know Oiwa a little bit. So I will talk a little bit about Oiwa and these other ferocious ghosts, which is called the onryo. And I would also, from there, introduce to you the characters. There's like some of them are very ferocious and some of them are not so bad, that are being presented on the traditional Japanese stage. So I will show you some slides and some pictures to sort of highlight what they are, who they are, why are they being featured as like fearsome or powerful, right? So these are all some of the very famous and well-known supernatural characters that a lot of people know in the pre-modern Japanese traditional theater context. So, and for the last part of my talk, I will bring you all back to present day, right? I mean, we don't want to get stuck in the past anyway. So I will bring you all back to the present day, and then I will quickly look at two Japanese anime which features the supernatural beings. And then I will kind of like say a little bit on how different they are from their predecessors on the traditional Japanese stage. So that is my presentation outline. J-horror, broadly speaking, refers to the fictive narratives that usually involve the supernatural, like ghosts, demons, and then in these tales, inexplicable things happened. Like suddenly the videotape starts to move, or like you get murdered by some kind of air arising from a well or something like that. So these stories create a kind of like creepy psychological scare that you don't know what's lurking behind you, and therefore it scares you, scares the readers who read the text, or especially the movie audience who are watching the films. So a famous kabuki scholar once said that in Japanese pre-modern Japanese literary creations, there are a lot of ghost stories, and I believe it. And not only do I believe it, I also want to expand that definition and say that especially on the stage, on theatrical performances, there are a lot of very interesting and sometimes inexplicable beings that are that show up on the stage. So what I think is important today, though, to kind of realize is that in present day, when we talk about J-horror, we always what is the most closely related to the image that we immediately have is actually films that's derived from Japanese movies. So for instance, the very well-known international hit horror film, The Ring, 1998, directed by Nakata Hideo. Like I've just mentioned earlier on, it used very common daily objects, right, like a phone or a videotape, to sort of like create suspense, surprises, and then shock. So that when the audience member, after watching the film, they go home and then they still feel scared. And this is the real J-horror essence. Well, I didn't come up with that. Some scholars actually say that, right? So, so then these are some examples. If you look at these two slides, these are the posters of Ring and Sadako versus Kayako, which was made in 2016. As I have mentioned, scary tales such as these like J-horror movies are not just like, are not the only kind of like scary stories that only started in the past 50 years. In fact, we already knew Oiwa, right, who is from the Edo period. And, but is Oiwa the first scary character in a horror Japanese story? The answer is no. Oiwa, who first appeared in the Edo period kabuki play Yotsuya Kaidan, which is translated as The Ghost Story of Yotsuya, a play by Tsuruya Namboku, was depicted in these two pictures that was drawn by a very famous Edo period painter. His name was Utagawa Kuniyoshi. So if you look at these two paintings, you would see that Oiwa is depicted as a very scary woman, right? She has like, her eyes are bulging out and she's totally disfigured, despite the fact that she was famed as a beautiful woman. So, and this kind of, not only is she like looking very ugly, she also looks very scary. Right? The picture to the right is a painting, is a woodblock painting depicting a famous Edo period kabuki actor who performed the role of Oiwa in a kabuki play. So you see the very detailed makeup that sort of created a realistic, so-called, a stage presence of this very scary woman, and thus, produce a very dramatic and hopefully enticing play that will attract audiences, of course, right? But definitely, Oiwa is not the first scary horror character. I would like to introduce to you this person called Sugawara Michizane. So, if you look at the painting that of Sugawara, you would see him as this like very gentle-looking and scholar who seems to be the kind of like typical scholars who cannot pick a fight or perhaps couldn't pick up a sword to fight. But Sugawara, who was born in 845, he and died in 903, was a Heian period court officer. So he was born in a very scholarly family, and then he became a court official and has been promoted to quite a high rank. But like all the political world, he was ousted by his political enemy. So he was being exiled to Dazaifu in Kyushu. So from Kyoto, from the capital, he was like being like, kicked out of the capital political circle and then being like sent to this really miserable small town. But actually, Dazaifu wasn't that small, but not away from the center of power. So poor Sugawara died in exile, and of course not a happy death. As soon as that happened, not long after his death, back in Kyoto, where in the capital, there was a huge thunderstorm. And during this huge thunderstorm, lightning also struck. Lightning struck the palace and then caused a fire. Several court officials were killed during this huge thunderstorm disaster, and several of them were killed by the fire that was caused by the lightning. So, even though the emperor was not hurt during this accident, during this incident, he got so worried, and witnessing death was not a good experience for him. So he died several months later. Now, how do we account for this sudden, or rather, how do the Heian court elites account for this sudden death, or of all their their court colleagues, right? And then this sudden, inexplicable natural disaster. So the conclusion was that, it was Sugawara whose ghost flew back all the way from Kyushu to Kyoto to cause this huge disaster. And what do? What could anyone do to this, right? The only way to sort of placate an angry ghost, which is the onryo, right? To placate an angry ghost is to sort of give him back what he was unjustly taken away from. So in Kyoto, the Kitano Tenmangu, which was built to commemorate him, or which was built as a shrine to dedicate to him, became a key attractions. So then apparently, so he became, instead of the angry ghost, became the guardian angel of studies. So if you go to Kyoto today and go to the Kitano Tenmangu, you could still see his shrine. So then in this slide, you would see the two paintings from the emaki, from a picture scroll in the pre-modern period. I don't know if you could see clearly, but you would, if you look very carefully, you could see the face of this angry creature, red, amongst the dark cloud. So this is Sugawara causing the thunder and creating fire and creating this huge havoc in the court. So this is the pictorial presentation of Sugawara's power, right? So Sugawara Michizane is also well remembered, not just in the picture scroll, but also on the No stage. So No is a traditional Japanese theatrical genre established in the 14th century by the father and son, Zeami and Kanami. So the other traditional theatrical genre are the No, Kyogen, Kabuki, and Bunraku. The No theater is one of the oldest performing arts that is still in existence in Japan and also worldwide, and it has been awarded the UNESCO Important Intangible Cultural Property, the status of that. And then amongst some international theatrical companies, the techniques used in No has often been integrated. So we see that No is very much alive in various parts of the whole performance theatrical traditions. And the No theater has created many memorable characters, including Michizane. In this slide, that you will see this character with red hair and very ferocious looking mask, and this is a screenshot that I took from a performance presented by the Ozuki No Theater. And this character is Michizane, is Sugawara Michizane. And the name of this play is called Laiden, literally the thunder and lightning. So in this play that depicts Sugawara's anger, this powerful and ferocious angry ghost who is coming back to the capital to start this thunder and lightning to avenge his untimely death. And then, but if you look at the next slide, you will realize that he's being confronted by a monk. So this is the story of the no play Laiden, where Sugawara no Michizane came back to want to sort of like create havoc to avenge the injustice that's been done to him, but the monk is there to subdue him. So this is the story of this famous Heian period, of this very famous Heian period court officer. But of course, there's not just only like Sugawara, right? There are in the no repertoire, there are many examples of onryo. So, for example, in this slide, you would see that I have Taira no Koremori in Funabenke, and then there's also, and not just all men, of course. There is also a woman. There's a wife in Kanawa, and then there's also a gardener in a play called the Damask Drum. So, do we say that? Do we think that, oh, on no stage, these are all like, do we see only angry ghosts? That's not true either. We also see on the no stage various different kinds of supernatural beings, such as a tengu or a thunder god. So let me show you a few illustrations here. In this slide, the character to the left, holding this like long sword-like weapon, he is Taira no Koremori in Funabenke. So he is avenging his death. So this story, Funabenke, is the story of warfare, right? It is based on the tale of Heike, a very famous medieval period war narrative. So the whole Taira family was being defeated by the Minamoto family, and represented by one of the very famous warrior in the Minamoto family is Yoshitsune, and you can see him like performed by a little child on the right hand side of the picture, and they were crossing a big river in order to go to the western part of Japan. So, being defeated by Yoshitsune, and so the angry ghosts of Koremori rised up from the water and challenged Yoshitsune. So we probably cannot see very clearly the face of this angry ghost, but he has a ferocious demon mask to sort of like illustrate the angry and the violent nature of this character. So then they had a big fight, but unfortunately, Koremori did not win in this fight. So he went back to the water, and Yoshitsune successfully crossed the river. Now, I was just saying that, it's just not just all men who are angry and who could exert a lot of power in killing or taking revenge towards the injustice that's been made to them. So we see here in this next slide, the a wife, I think she's nameless. So her husband abandoned her and married someone else new. So she got very, very angry, and therefore she turned into a demon in order to haunt the husband and kill her together with the new wife. So then in the right-hand corner of the slide, you see a priest in white. He's the famous Shinto priest, Abe no Seimei. He is hired, he's asked to come and handle, or rather come and subdue the angry ghosts of the wife. One year, I was in New York City and I went to watch a no play in Central Park. It was a outdoor no, right? So then they were performing Funabenke, this particular play, and the lines, when the line says that, suddenly it gets cloudy and thunderstorm starts to strike, and this is the part where the vengeful ghost came out from the water. When the weather starts to change, and then lightning and thunder starts to fall, and exactly at that point, when the characters were performing this part and the musicians were singing, it started to rain. So started to rain in Central Park. So I would always remember this particular play as like, having all this like very interesting coincidence where when the line says that it rains, then it actually did rain. In fact, Funabenke is based on a story, like one of the very famous story from the medieval war tale called The Tale of Heike. The Tale of Heike is a kind of a historical narrative depicting like one of the most important and also like large-scale war during the medieval period of Japan. So this particular war tale has a very long and complex history by itself, which I think I will not touch on here. After it's been transmitted and actually organized into a more structured narrative, the Tale of Heike, this particular medieval war tale, has become a very important source of inspiration for a lot of like artistic creations. And these artistic creations include theatrical work, such as No and Kabuki and bunraku, and also sometimes modern Japanese creations, and also paintings, and sometimes poetry and literary works. And amongst this, the tale of Heike war tale inspired plays, Funabenke is one of the very well-known ones. In fact, Funabenke is a very well-known No play, and a lot of time when No theaters wanted to bring No plays abroad, they usually include like Funabenke as one of the plays that they would introduce to like audience members who's first watched No plays. And I just cannot help but want to share this like personal story with you. In this slide, I wanted to show you two plays which are not about angry ghosts. So then we know that on the No theater stage there are various kinds of categories, and while the warrior plays involving like angry ghosts and battles and revenge is quite popular, there are also other categories in the No play that also feature powerful supernatural beings, but not in a contentious content. So on this slide, you will see that the play on the left is called Kurama Tengu, and then the play on the right, with three deities dancing, is a play called Arashiyama or Mount Arashi. So these two are No paintings from Edo period, and the first play, Kurama Tengu, is about a deity, a special kind of like a supernatural being in the Japanese legendary imaginations, which is a Tengu. Tengu is a deity with a large nose and very powerful, and sometimes they act as like, sometimes they just create havoc and being very mischievous, but sometimes they act as a protector of the land. So, and then in this other play, the Mount Arashi, Arashiyama, is the three deities who actually, in the first part of the play pretend to be a old man and an old woman, but then when they reveal their real identity, they are actually deities who are there to bless the land, especially because this is a springtime. So they are not ferocious at all, but they are very powerful and they are able to sort of protect the land. Of course, there are many more other forms of supernatural beings, both malicious and benign, and on other like theatrical tradition, on other like traditional theatrical genre, such as Kabuki and bunraku. We already have met Oiwa. Oiwa is the fearsome but greatly wronged woman from the Edo period kabuki play. Other than Oiwa, there are also other forms of supernatural beings. So what I wanted to introduce here is the fox in Yoshitsune Sembong Sakura. So this is a kabuki play. This is a very complex kabuki play. But in this particular segment of the story, the fox, which you can see in white in the slide, the fox is actually a very magical and a creature with very advanced magical power. So what he did was, for some reason, he kept shape shift into a human being, and then kept wanting to go close to this Lady Shizuka. So when Shizuka is in the court, this fox showed up, and he performs all kinds of very interesting stage techniques, like showing up from the basement, or like jumping up on the pillar in the palace, and so on. So then the reason why this is happening is because the fox is interested in something. You think maybe the lady, but no. The fox is not interested in the lady. The fox would like to get access to the Lady Shizuka's drum. So why? Because the drum is made from the skin of the fox's parents. So this is a very filial fox, right? He risks his life getting to know, wanting to go closer to the human beings who actually killed his parents, technically, right? So in any event, there is a good happy ending to this particular story, because at the end of all these encounters and pleading and argument, the fox actually was able to get a hold of the drum, and he disappears with the drum. So this is a happy story, and in a very famous kabuki play. And this play was performed by the Kokuritsu Gekijo, the National Theatre. Now that we have met several characters from the pre-modern Japanese theatrical stage, I think we could sort of take a virtual bullet train and go to contemporary time. Right? So in contemporary time, we already know that in the 1980s, the genre of Japanese horror, J-horror, the film genre J-horror was started to become very well-known and very attractive in Japanese cinematic scenes. But what I actually really wanted to talk about a little bit more here is the anime. So there's two anime that I would like to introduce, and they are Pompoko, or Heisei Tanuki Gassen Pompoko, created by Studio Ghibli. And the second film, which is A Letter to Momo, Momo e no Tengami, is probably less well known, but in both films we would see the introduction of supernatural beings. Not really that ferocious, but they have supernatural powers, and they created an impact in the lives of people in the story. So, first and foremost, I think I would like to say a few words about Pompoko, and the main characters of Pompoko are actually tanuki, which is raccoon dogs. So, and then the next group of supernatural beings is actually the fox in this particular anime. If you look at the slide, you would see that to the right-hand corner there is a picture of a tanuki, and this picture is from the Edo period. So tanuki or raccoon dog has undergone a kind of identity shift since the Edo period. So actually, before Edo period, during the medieval period, they were considered as ferocious and mean animals who were kind of like an enemy to the human beings. But into the Edo period, the perception of a tanuki has kind of changed, and they have become more human-friendly and also became a symbol of great wealth, right? And then the legend is that tanuki have, once they achieve like some kind of like magical status, they are able to use their body parts, right? You know, the stomach to sort of to hit the body like a drum, and other parts of the body to create magical effects. The other magical creature or supernatural creature in this film, Pompoko, is the fox. So fox too, in Japanese legends, they enjoy a very they enjoy a very special kind of status, right? So you can see from the slide too that the fox have their own shrines, right? They are believed to be the messengers to the Inari deity. So if you go to Fushimi in Japan, Kyoto, then you can visit this like really beautiful shrine, which is actually the shrines of the fox, which you can see, you know, the two foxes guarding the entrance. So in this anime, Pompoko, the tanuki as well as the fox, they had to use their magical power to try to protect their own lands, because human beings have been encroaching on their territory. And in part of the story goes that the tanuki decided that, okay, you know, if they stage this huge yokai parade or monster parade, then maybe the human beings will get so scared that they would go away, right? So then in this slide, you can see that, you know, part of this like, you know, illusionary effects that the tanukis are trying to create is a kitsune's wedding, and also you know, they transform themselves into yokai of like instruments, right? So these are two illustrations of like, you know, I think these are very good illustration of how in, like I said earlier on, right, that, you know, that in Japanese storytelling traditions, there's a lot of like supernatural beings or a lot of like ghost stories. So without revealing too much, very unfortunately, the tanuki in this whole parade did not achieve their desired outcome. So their parade was very spectacular, but ... Okay, so then I wanted to talk about the next film, which is A Letter to Momo. A Letter to Momo is it has a very simple story. The girl Momo, you can see in the slide, she's about 10 or 11 years old. So she had a fight with her father, and then the father had very unfortunately died after their fight. So the relationship, this argument was not resolved. So Momo and her mother went back to the mother's hometown in the Seto Inland Sea, Seto Naikai, and in the process of moving back, Momo met these three yokai on the slides. You know, Kawa, Iwa, and Mame. So these three yokais are no longer very powerful nor very ferocious, right? Into this particular film, we see that the yokai, or you know, the supernatural beings, they are presented as cuddly, you know, as like closer to human beings than in other situations. They are not very powerful, but you know, and they make mistakes, you know, they are just like us, right? So then the reason why these three supernatural beings have to come down and help Momo was because they made mistake while they were executing their deity's duties. So they had to come down to the human world and help Momo to sort of overcome her problems. We see that in this anime, the supernatural beings, the yokai, are no longer very ferocious or extremely powerful. In fact, they are actually quite like human beings. You know, one of them is really greedy, always wanting to eat food, and then another one of the yokai is very shy, and you know, but they are all very kind, just like all of us, right? So then the only reason why they have to come down to help Momo in her adventure is because they made mistake in heaven while executing their duties as deities. So now they have been demoted to come to human realm to help Momo, so that to sort of like, compensate for the mistakes that they have made. And by the end of the story, they were successful in helping Momo, and Momo had overcome her grief and able to sort of start a new life. So this is a very heartwarming story. And without these like supernatural beings, without these three yokai, Momo probably would not be able to to overcome this particular difficult period of her life. In my last slide, I would like to quickly sort of like present a summarize and make two concluding remarks. That in almost every cultural traditions, and especially in the Japanese cultural traditions, supernatural beings, from Onryo, which is the angry ghosts such as Oiwa or Michizane, to yokai monsters such as the tanuki or the yokai in Momo in the film Letter to Momo. These supernatural beings are everywhere, right? In the Japanese literary, theatrical, and artistic creations. So we see them in, like I said, you see them on the stage and in the paintings, like I have illustrated. I think it is fair to say that supernatural beings, horror or not horror, they can be understood better if we sort of like situate them within the cultural context in which they are being created. For example, the fact that Michizane was being treated first as this like scary, ferocious thunder god that has to be placated, and then later on, he's being respected as the scholar, the guardian angel of scholarship, indicates that during that Heian period there is a need to sort of like explain certain kind of like inexplicable natural disaster, and then the story, or rather the events that happened to Michizane's life sort of fit into this narrative very nicely. Therefore, if we understood the kind of like the cultural or the political context in which the story happens, then we could see that we will understand the story, the narrative better, not just simply as like this very adventurous, very interesting, or perhaps a bit scary story, but also the kind of like social or cultural context in which the story is being created. I hope you've enjoyed the talk, and thank you for joining me.